Chapter 13, October 1918. The events of September had been disturbing, Dr. Harvey thought. Surely October will be a time for reconciliation. But now he was reconsidering. The gathering at the railway station this morning had not been a healing experience. During the last week of September, trials had been convened at the courthouse for 6 persons accused of sedition. 4 were found guilty and sentenced to serve a prison term at the state penitentiary. This morning, 2 of these men were delivered to the railway station and loaded into a Northern Pacific car to be escorted to Deer Lodge. He had watched the gathering from across the street, feeling much more remorse than reconciliation. This October day he hoped would be a day for future generations to remember, but not repeat. He was in his office reviewing neatly written messages May had placed on his desk. A mother was not able to bring her son to an appointment this afternoon because both she and the 9-year-old boy were too ill to come to town. Both had fever and fatigue. He spoke softly to himself. Likely best for them to stay home. Good chance they have influenza. Best not to expose others. Need to confirm someone is available to help with food, water, and chores. He thought about how patients like these might benefit from being in a hospital for several days, but since there was no hospital in Forsyth, he did not dwell on this thought. Another message described a telephone call from the state health department. How many cases of influenza had been reported last week? Dr. Harvey had delayed a report to the state because he had not received reports from other physicians. He suspected he was not the only physician seeing influenza-like illnesses, so he had asked May to contact each physician's office in the county to encourage reporting and to confirm the tally for last week. He would talk with May in a few minutes to hear what she had learned. He looked at the final message placed on his desk. Gerd had called to ask him to visit the Mueller ranch as soon as possible. Herman Mueller was very sick, as were 2 of the children. He knew the proud, self-reliant rancher must be very ill for Gerd to be allowed to call for help. Earlier that day, he had taken some solace knowing Herman was not among the men being transported to Deer Lodge, but now a new concern moved in. He walked to the examination room door and saw May had returned from lunch. He said, "Thank you for the messages. Some of the illness is probably influenza. Would you please call the Mueller home and tell Gerd I will come to their ranch later this afternoon?" "Yes, I will call," said May. "You have patients scheduled until 4, so I'll tell Gerd it will probably be after 5 before you get there." A young mother carrying her toddler son had entered the office. The small boy sneezed but did not move his head from his mother's shoulder. The listless boy was too tired to move his arms or legs. The mother also sneezed. She blew her nose into a handkerchief she had just used to wipe her son's nose. She said, "Hello, doctor. Sorry I'm late. It has not been easy to get my son dressed and out of the house today." "Don't be concerned about the time. Please come in," he replied as he accompanied her to the examination room. She sat in the chair beside his desk with the boy's head still on her shoulder. "I'll be back in just a minute," he said before returning to the entry area to talk with May. "We need to review our triage procedures to identify patients with upper respiratory signs and fever as soon as possible and keep those patients away from other patients," he said. "Have you been able to contact physicians' offices to determine how many influenza cases have been seen? Also, would you please contact Francis Olson and a county commissioner to arrange a time I could meet with each, preferably the 3 of us meeting together?" May replied, "Yes, I will contact Francis and a commissioner. I have contacted the other physicians in the county. All have seen influenza cases. I have written the number of diagnosed cases from each office here." She handed the note to him and continued, "I would very much like to review the triage procedures." "Thanks, and we shall," he said before stepping back into the examination room. "When did your boy become ill?" he asked. 3 days ago. He got up in the morning and seemed to be fine. By afternoon he was sick, curled up in his bed, and would not eat lunch," she said. "His forehead was very warm, so I tucked him under the covers. The next day he started sneezing. Now I'm not feeling well." She sneezed again and wiped her nose with the same handkerchief. He asked, "How old is he?" 23 months. "Do you have other children? Is anyone else in the family ill now?" "My other children are 6 and 8 years old. They are at school today and have not been ill. This morning my husband told me he was not feeling well, but he went out to tend our animals. He stayed outside working today." He took the boy's temperature and then wiped alcohol on the thermometer before checking the mother's. The boy's temperature was 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and the mother's 100. He used the stethoscope to listen for breath sounds on the boy's back and then on the mother's. Both were breathing freely. He advised the mother to put the boy to bed and keep other family members away from him and away from her too, as much as possible. And both of them should drink lots of fluids. He told her the illness was most likely influenza and would probably resolve within 5 to 7 days. The next 2 patients he saw had come for regular checkups of their medical conditions. One was a woman aged 62 who had intermittent urine incontinence and a prolapsed uterus for which he had prescribed a pessary when he had seen her about 6 weeks previously. The incontinence had not fully resolved, but she said the frequency had decreased. He advised continuing use of pessary. The second patient was a railroad worker aged 35 who had sustained a deep laceration in his right forearm at work last week. Dr. Harvey had cleaned and stitched the wound. He was pleased to see it was healing with no sign of infection. He advised leaving the stitches in place. He would remove them when the patient visited again in 1 more week. He saw more patients as the day went on. The last scheduled patient had called May to cancel because the patient had a fever and just wanted to go to bed. When May told him of his cancellation, she said, "Influenza season does seem to be here. I do not recall visit cancellations like this happening so often last year." He replied, "Yes, some of the patients seem quite ill. Would you please purchase an additional supply of face masks at the pharmacy before it closes this afternoon? We will begin asking those with fever and cough to wear a mask while they are here. You and I may begin wearing face masks too. We will talk more about triage procedures tomorrow morning." She responded, "I'll go to the pharmacy now. I did contact the commissioner and Francis Olson. They will both come here at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." "Thank you for making that appointment so quickly," he said. "I am going to visit the Mueller Ranch now." During the drive to the Mueller Ranch, he felt increasingly uncomfortable about the crescendo of illnesses, very likely due to influenza. He saw a few clouds in the distant western sky, but above him the sky was clear. By the time he returned to town, he would be able to see an array of stars. He had long been fascinated by mythology, the propensity of people to explain the unknown by attributing influence to gods and stars. He anticipated sighting Aquarius, the water bearer, and maybe Pegasus, the horse god. In ancient times, a flood such as the Yellowstone River deluge in June might have been attributed to an overactive Aquarius, and the designation of a horse god recognized essential contributions of horses to developing civilization century after century. Even now, in rural areas such as Rosebud County, horses remained essential to ranchers. Machines were increasingly used as substitutes for horses, but were still measured by horsepower. He wondered if his medical knowledge would be sufficient to control a deluge of illnesses once the influenza epidemic arrived in earnest. For centuries, some diseases have been attributed to extraterrestrial influences. The term influenza was derived from a belief the illness was due to the influence from the stars. He gave no credence to this archaic belief. He was convinced influenza was infectious. One prominent scientist had isolated a bacterium he thought to be the cause. He had filtered and grown this agent in the laboratory. Other scientists were not convinced. They thought the disease was caused by a yet-to-be-identified agent so small it could not be filtered. In any event, he could see the disease was highly communicable and, for some patients, life-threatening. He continued driving west on River Valley Road until he turned onto the rutted, bumpy driveway and progressed slowly towards the Mueller's ranch house. Their border collie was now running beside the Hudson and barking, not threateningly, but as if to say, "Keep coming, this is the right direction." When he parked the automobile near the house, Gerd came to greet him. "Still," she said to the obedient dog. To Dr. Harvey, she said, "Danke for coming. Mein Onkel is very ill, und die Kinder are also ill." He responded, "Go inside so I can see them." The house was single-story. He entered into a combined kitchen and dining room and continued into the living room. A hallway led from the living room to the 3-bedroom doors. Gerd guided him to one of the bedrooms where Herman was lying in bed. Jana Mueller sat in the chair beside the bed. She did not move when he entered the room. She was bent forward, her hands clasped in her lap, her face looking down at her hand. She did not speak. He stepped to the bedside to examine Herman, whose face was ashen and cold to the touch. He was not breathing and had no pulse. Dr. Harvey judged he had been dead for an hour or more. He looked at Gerd and said, "Let's take your aunt into the living room." He took Jana's hand and said, "Please come with us. I am so sorry." Gerd sat with her arm around Jana in the living room while Dr. Harvey returned to the bedroom. He covered Herman's face with the bedsheet before going to a second bedroom. There he found two young sisters lying beside each other in bed. He touched the forehead of each. Neither felt febrile. "How are you young women feeling?" "We are feeling better today," replied one sister. The other nodded in agreement. Dr. Harvey examined them. Both were breathing easily, and their lungs were clear to his stethoscope assessment. He returned to the living room and asked Gerd if he could use the telephone. He called the funeral home and asked the mortician to come for the body. He also cautioned the mortician to have workers wear face masks when handling the body. He turned to Gerd, who was still sitting with Jana. He said, "It is very important for you to take care of yourself so you can care for the family at this time. Have you and the children eaten anything this afternoon? This will be a good time to prepare some food for them. But be sure they get lots of liquids to drink. I will stay until the funeral home workers come." He sat beside Jana and said, "I'm very sorry for your loss. Herman was a strong, loving man. Would you like me to contact the Reverend at your church?" She did not respond for what seemed like a long time, but finally said very softly, "Ja, but we must sing the hymn of Deutsch at the funeral." Then she cried, and he put his arm around her as she leaned on him. After Gerd had given some food to the ill children, she returned to sit by Jana. Dr. Harvey called the Reverend, who said he, too, would visit the Mueller home that night. About an hour passed before the two men from the funeral home arrived. They wore face masks while they put Herman Mueller into a body bag and carried it from the bedroom to their vehicle. One of the men talked with Gerd briefly about some aspects of handling and preparing the body. He agreed to call her the next day to discuss plans for a funeral. The other man mentioned to Dr. Harvey that this was the second body they picked up this week for which a physician had advised them to wear a face mask. He asked if they would need more face masks. Dr. Harvey explained influenza seemed to be spreading more and more, and face mask use was likely. Dr. Harvey realized there had become an urgent need to provide recommendations not just to funeral home workers, but also to public safety workers and others in the community. Before leaving the Mueller home, he encouraged Gerd and Jana Mueller to get some sleep if they could. He also thanked them for not hesitating to contact him if there was any way he might help. Gerd had tears in her eyes. Jana was not crying, but had a distant, deeply pained look. He felt solemn during the drive back to town. The North Star was clearly visible. While he knew it was not responsible for influenza, its appearance to commemorate the loss of Herman Mueller seemed appropriate. He knew many more commemorations would be needed before this epidemic ran its course. In his room that evening, he ate little. He had little hunger for food. He kept thinking about how little he had to offer those sick with influenza. Someday medicine might be more helpful for those suffering from this illness. Someday a vaccine might be developed to prevent the disease, but someday was not now. He poured Flying U into a glass and closed his eyes. He saw his wife so vividly that for a moment he felt she was with him. Then he realized he was alone. He sipped the whiskey. The next morning he washed his face and shaved using water in the white metal basin sitting atop the chest of drawers next to his bed. As he pulled on his shoes, he saw the empty whiskey bottle on the table. What was he doing? He regularly advised patients not to drink excessively, yet he himself regularly did. He resolved to cut back, but also made a mental note to get another bottle of the Chaucier brand today. When he arrived at his office, he called the funeral home to confirm the mortician was wearing a face mask when he prepared the bodies. He was reassured when he heard the use of face masks was standard practice in all cases, whether or not an infectious disease was the presumed cause of death. Part of the mortician's reply startled him. "I received another call this morning to come for a body at home here in town. The family's doctor thinks this death might be due to influenza. Then Sheriff Starr called. He said he would be calling you too." Dr. Harvey said, "I have not talked to the sheriff yet. What did he tell you?" "He said that he has been contacted by a rancher out on the Reservation Creek Road. The rancher had not seen his neighbors for a few days and went over to a visit," continued the morticians. "Two neighbors were dead in their beds. A grandfather and his teenage son who had been staying with him to help with the livestock. Only a young granddaughter who had been helping with household work was alive. She was lying on a bed too ill to get up, to get help for herself or others. I'll be going for those bodies later this morning." Dr. Harvey replied, "Oh my. Be sure your workers wear face masks and wash their hands after handling the bodies. Thank you for this information." Dr. Harvey called Harold Starr, who immediately said, "I was about to call you." Harold recounted the events as the mortician had. Before ending the phone call, Dr. Harvey shared information with Harold. "This morning I will meet with the county commissioner regarding isolation and quarantine steps we may need to impose," he said. "You may be hearing from the commissioner about these issues soon." "Thank you for calling," concluded Harold. By the time he disconnected the phone call, May had come into the examination room. "The commissioner and Francis Olson are here. Shall I bring them in?" "Yes, please," he said. Once the commissioner and Francis were seated, he said, "Thank you for coming. As you know, an epidemic of Spanish influenza is sweeping through many parts of the country. I want to be sure you know the epidemic has arrived here and is likely to amplify during the next weeks. Some steps must be taken to try and limit the spread of disease and save some lives." The commissioner did not seem surprised. He asked, "What steps do you recommend? To capture people's attention, we will be competing with news and concerns about the war." Dr. Harvey responded, "When family members and nearby neighbors are ill with influenza, some are dying. The control measures will be of interest to many. Some of the measures will cause inconvenience. I think it will be possible to capture attention." Francis observed, "Schools have been closed in Bozeman, Scobie, and several other towns already. Do we need to close schools here?" "Yes, I think the schools should be closed until the epidemic subsides," he replied. "This will be more effective than trying to enforce quarantine measures each time a student develops influenza." He continued, "It might be helpful for me to list the prevention steps we need to take. Then we can discuss individual steps as thoroughly as necessary. Listing these steps will take several minutes." He began, What I am recommending is based on advice from the State Health Department. Dr. Crogswell has sought information from the U.S. Public Health Service and communicable disease experts around the country. There is no surefire way to stop influenza, but we can take steps to slow it down, to prevent some cases, and to save some lives. Francis interrupted. "I read in the Times Journal about a mail-order product said to protect against influenza. At the school superintendent's meeting in Helena last month, I heard there was a vaccine. Will we use these products?" Dr. Harvey replied, "Well, if the nostrums advertised in the newspaper provided even half the benefit complained, I would be out of business. It would be good for the town if disease could be treated and prevented so easily, but I won't be without work anytime soon. Claims like those you have seen are entirely bogus. There is no evidence to support treatment with those products." He paused briefly and continued, "And no effective vaccine is available. A research physician in Pennsylvania, Dr. Lewis, thinks influenza is caused by bacteria, which some call Pfizer's bacillus. He has prepared a vaccine from the bacteria, but there is no evidence at this time that the vaccine provides protection. The state health department is not recommending it. Some of the illnesses with fever we saw during the spring may have been cases of influenza, but the illness then was mild compared to what we are seeing now. This is a severe disease. It has a sudden onset, and for some patients, a rapid decline. The state health department says the disease hit hard in Scobie a couple weeks ago, then Glendive, Great Falls, and some larger towns. It is here now, and there are steps we need to take. First, because the illness is passed from one person to another, assemblies of people need to be restricted. This means closing schools and restricting gatherings at places people congregate, including saloons, churches, and fraternal organizations. I realize we can't shut down businesses such as mercantile stores, barbershops, or banks, but we need to advise business owners to not let crowds form in their establishments. People should not be in stores or shops any longer than necessary. Second, public safety personnel, including police and funeral home workers, should wear face masks to protect themselves. Store clerks, barbers, deliverymen, and others who work with the public should also wear face masks while they are working. Also, the Board of Commissioners should appoint a quarantine warden who could help Sheriff Starr enforce health ordinance requirements such as these. A warden could post notices, identify and report to me cases consistent with influenza, and report to the sheriff if a person who lives in a house where there is influenza cases breaks quarantine rules and lingers in the public. I do not know what funds might be used to support such a quarantine warden, but I strongly recommend establishing this temporary position for 2 to 3 months. I will be reporting the number of influenza cases to the state health department each week. I will work with physicians in the country to ensure families of diagnosed cases are advised about the importance of isolation and quarantine. Dr. Harvey poured water into glasses for himself, the commissioner, and Francis. Then he went on. It is likely many will be ill in the coming weeks. Some of the ill would benefit from care at a hospital. Since we do not have a hospital, we should establish a hospital-like setting soon. Dr. Coswell has formed a cadre of physicians who are providing assistance to rural areas of the state. 6 of these physicians have been assigned to work in Montana by the U.S. Public Health Service. If one were to come to Forsyth, he would be working in a military uniform. Another physician in this cadre is Dr. Landstrom from Helena. As you know, he has been a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat, but he has suspended his campaign to be involved in the statewide influenza control effort. At this mention, the commissioner interrupted. Hell, he said, Landstrom may be well intended and may provide useful service around the state. But if you ask me, he suspended his campaign because Tom Walsh is so far ahead. Landstrom has no chance to win in any event. If the current administration wants to stop the spread of influenza, why are they holding a political gathering in Bozeman despite their own advice against public gatherings? That kind of stunt doesn't add credibility to the kind of restrictions we may be establishing in Rosebud County. Damn Democrats in Helena, a house of duplicity. Dr. Harvey was aware of the issues that piqued the commissioner's ire, but opted not to comment further on them. Instead, he asked the commissioner, would you be willing to convene a meeting of the commissioners soon to discuss and I hope enact a health ordinance based on the recommendation I am making? The commissioner replied, yes. When could you have the recommendations in written form for us to consider at a meeting? We'll meet as soon as the document is ready to review. He replied, I'll prepare the recommendations this evening. You will have them tomorrow. The commissioner responded, good. It won't be easy to keep the commissioners and town's attention on disease control with the war and the draft and all the Loyalty League activity continuing, to say nothing of decisions for distributing funds for the grain and seed support program. Still, we should enact the health ordinance soon. Francis added, Montana State College has suspended all its classes for this term. One of our local high school graduates has been studying nursing at MSC and the Deaconess Hospital in Bozeman. She decided to return to Forsyth to be with her family until classes resume. She might be a candidate to help provide nursing care if a temporary hospital is established. That is a good idea, he replied. I would like to talk with this young woman. Would you please leave her name with me? Yes, I will, said Francis. When will we meet to confirm procedures for closing schools as a result of this health ordinance? Let's meet tomorrow, he said. I'll provide written recommendations to the commissioner and bring a copy to your office. I'd like to do this before noon. Would you be available tomorrow at 11? She replied, yes, I will be at my office. Thank you for the briefing today and for the work you are doing. The commissioner added, thank you indeed. I will see you tomorrow morning. After the commissioner and Francis left, he asked May to reschedule the next day's morning appointments. He told her he would have handwritten recommendations when he came to the office and asked that she type the text so he could provide a clear, professional-looking document to the commissioners. May said, I'll clear the schedule and be ready to type. This will give me a chance to use a new ribbon and try the new box of carbon paper. 2. My Underwood can provide a professional-looking original. Then I'll type another copy with some extra carbon copies you may be able to use. Thank you, he said. You are invaluable, you know. While he prepared the list of recommendations that evening, he felt more involved with the public's health than he had since arriving almost 2 years ago. Still, he could not displace his sense of foreboding about the persisting allegations of sedation or the burst of influenza already underway.